Shalom, I'm Rabbi Gail Schuster-Buskila, and today I'd like to talk to you about my Midrash for Parashat Miketz, which is the 10th Torah portion for the book of Genesis. Whereas I'll start here with my Midrash. This is my website for my Midrashim, Midrash Harabah. And today we're going to be reading from the 44th chapter of the book of Genesis. But if you're interested in reading the entire Torah portion, we're going to begin in the middle, actually, of Genesis 44. It's a bigger Torah portion. I suggest this wonderful website, Sefaria, and you can find the entire Torah portion here. Now, this website puts the Hebrew and the English side by side. And you can see here we're talking about Joseph and his brothers. I'm going a little fast because I'm really interested in chapter 44 and not so much in chapter 43 at all. There are certain things I'd like to talk about. Now, what you see here when it comes to chapters really has nothing to do with the Hebrew Bible. Actually, the Hebrew Bible is not separated into chapters. This is a Christian invention. And so what I'd like to say is that we're going to take a look at some things that are connected to this Torah portion, but in a slightly different visual way. And here we have on this interesting website called the Ancient Near East Today, we have a copy of the world's oldest Torah scroll, piece of it, not the whole thing, of course. And I'd like you to look at the difference. Now, we, of course, from Sefaria see modern Hebrew, which is pointed. In other words, it has dots and dashes, which are the vowels, whereas this website shows how the Torah scroll will really look. And you can see there are columns. It's beautifully done. Let's see if we can get a little closer look. And you see there's spaces and there's no punctuation. Aren't there vowels, which are the dots and dashes, and there aren't any indications of how these things are supposed to be sung in the Torah portion. But there's no way to know between one sentence or the other. And this is a whole different discussion. And if you're interested in it, you look at any of the websites that talk about how the Torah was created. Now, I want to show you a little clearer way of seeing this, and this is from an interesting website that shows you every single solitary column of the Torah. In other words, the Sefer Torah, as you saw in the ancient scroll, is separated into columns. There are about 245, as you can see down here on the bottom, 245 different columns, and the column that I'm showing you right now is column 1, which is the first Breshit. I hope you can read. There's Breshit, the English, and of course Breshit is the very first word on the right-hand side. And our Torah portion actually begins at the break. There's a sort of a word in about the 8th or 9th line, and there's a break. And our portion, Miketz, is called after the second word in that line. I want you to look at the difference here. This Breshit has lots of paragraphs. Miketz doesn't. And I find it to be fascinating that Miketz itself has a totally different look than Breshit, the portion Breshit. Now we have a little closer look at, we'll have a closer look at the differences here between these ideas. As you can see, before I showed you that Miketz is at the beginning of a break in the lines. But there's something very interesting, at least I found it to be interesting. And I'm going to go ahead a little bit, and you notice this column has no breaks. That's column 47. That's the beginning of the Parashat. Miketz, column 48, is the next one. No break. Miketz 49, no break. very difficult to know where to stop and start just even a sentence. Again, Miketz. Another one. Very odd that these things keep going. Okay. Still no break. This is still Parashat Miketz. Okay, we're on column 52 now. Still no break. And finally column 53, and we see a break. Very often, a midrash deals with something that is problematic in the text. And you'll see that I've actually called this midrash Mind the Gap. I'd like to start now by reading from verse 10 in chapter 44, and then I'll read a little of my midrash, and then we'll talk about what all this means put together. He replied, and this would be Joseph, and no, so it will be so. The one who has it with him will be my slave, and you others will be blameless. He searched from the eldest to the youngest. He found the goblet in the sack of Benjamin. They tore at their clothes, and each one packed up his mule, and they returned to the city. Judah and his brothers arrived at Joseph's house, and he was still there. They fell down with their faces to the ground. My midrash begins. Joseph stood and watched his revenge come about as magnificent as any dish ever prepared for him. Revenge, served cold and sweet. Could there be another menu choice? Sizzling and spicy. Blood must have been surging furiously around his house as he saw the ultimate fruition of his plan in his childhood dreams, and so he turned and said, verse 17 in chapter 44. He said, unfortunately for me to do this to the man who has the goblet in his hand, he will be my slave, and you, meaning the rest of the brothers, can go in peace back to your father. Then there must have been a pause, as the words in the Torah scroll break only to continue this drama in the next portion. But still in the same chapter. Remember I said that the chapters and the portions are not connected. And you see I even put a little emphasis in the Torah portion that I took a screenshot of and put here in the Midrash. There's a break. Now I think of this as a cliffhanger. We don't know just yet at that moment what's going to happen. They don't know. I think Joseph knows, but they don't know. And what happened is that I thought of this as a cliffhanger. And we know about this. I was interested that the cliffhangers, as according to Wikipedia, Wikipedia doesn't know everything. They talk about the original cliffhanger being 1001 Nights, or maybe something with Dickens. Okay, I know that all of you know cliffhangers, where there's something that happens. And why is this split here? And it really is physically split in the Torah portion, in the Sefer Torah. You don't see the split as much here. Remember, we're getting to the end of this portion, and in a few minutes or a little while when we're reading it, we'll be seeing Vayigash. But you see this little samech here. This in the Hebrew says to us that there's a section, a closed, samek for sagur. There's a closed section that the words on either side in the columns of the Torah, and that there's a gap. And as I said, I named my midrash, Mind the Gap. You can see there. And the gap is not big. A good cliffhanger, you really shouldn't wait too long. And it means that it's called a literary device. That means you're going to want to go and continue reading. What I like, of course, and I thought of a visual way to look at the idea of cliffhanger, and there you go. This is one of my favorite cliffhangers. This is from a movie by Charlie Chaplin called Gold Rush. And this really seems to be the real meaning of a cliffhanger, but we're not talking about that exact kind of cliffhanger. I just had to add that because it just seemed to me to lighten the tension that is between these two sections, where he's talking about one of the people is going to be his slave, and these brothers of his have no idea what is going to be happening. And I, a little bit farther on, talk about the fact in that small but towering gap, Joseph was present too. It's my continuation of my Midrash. But we cannot see how he reacted either. Fate hovers above the room, full of brothers, children of the same man, but divided by time spent apart. Any hint of guilt in the air? Fear can bind them together and paralyze their senses. Joseph was going to let them work it out, negotiate to change the fate they perceived that he had planned for them. After this pause, the story will continue. And now, because I always like to give people a treat, it's not connected. Oh my goodness, I hope he doesn't fall down. Oh my goodness, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. Well, if you're interested in this whole scene, I suggest you go and find Gold Rush and watch whatever there is there, because it is adorable. So I like to hope everyone has a very good Shabbat, and it's Chanukah, and Shabbat Shalom, Chanukah Sameach, Parashat Miketz.